Whether you like to believe it or not, farms and farmhouses are pretty creepy. I mean, you could just walk into a farmhouse and feel this unsettling feeling that resonates throughout your body. But take a moment and listen to these few stories that center around ghosts. And maybe you'll want to rethink whether a peaceful night out in the farmhouse will do you any good. I grew up on a small farm in western New York. It was an old farmhouse built in the 1850s. Weird stuff happened frequently. You'd set an object down and it would disappear, only to reappear later in the same place. Being a farm, we had a lot of animals, particularly cats and dogs. The cats would often watch something we couldn't see moving around the room, and sometimes they would hiss at nothing. My little sister and I had a lot of frightening experiences over the years. Something often came into our room at night. I once heard it slowly climb up the stairs, then a figure looked around my door but quickly retreated when it saw me looking at nothing. My sister said she felt something settle at the end of her bed, like an adult was sitting there. Sometimes she could see the silhouette of an old man. We often wondered if it was our grandfather, since she didn't remember feeling frightened by the presence. I remember very clearly walking up stairs and waking up early when I was about 13. I don't remember where my sister was, but I was alone in the room. This would have been maybe 5:30 in the morning, and the sun was just starting to rise. My cat was howling, and I mean howling. He was normally really sweet and relaxed, but he was feeling kind of uneasy and freaking out, running between me and the door and meowing his head off. Finally, he just bolted and ran down the stairs. I shrugged it off and rolled over, trying to go back to sleep. I could feel something wasn't right and turned back towards the door to see what was up. Standing on the other side of the room was a white female figure. I couldn't see her face, but I could make out her long hair and body. We just sat there staring at each other for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard people starting to move around downstairs, and the figure disappeared. We also used to have a German shepherd named Jasmine. She was a ferocious guard dog, and if she heard or smelled anything out of place, she would bark to let it out. One day, I was upstairs in my bedroom and I heard Jasmine start barking. I went downstairs to let her out, expecting her to be waiting by the door, only she wasn't. She was standing in the living room, barking and growling at thin air. I mean, I asked her if she wanted to go outside, but she totally ignored me and kept barking at whatever it was she saw. When she finally stopped, she looked at me and was completely perplexed. If I was ever home alone in the middle of the day, I'd always hear voices from downstairs, usually male voices. I'd go down, thinking maybe someone had stopped by, but I wouldn't see anyone and the voices would stop. One night, I woke up. Listen, I'm a very light sleeper, and so I turned over so I was looking towards my sister's side of the room. I saw a little girl standing there, and it definitely wasn't my sister. For one thing, I could see my sister sleeping soundly in her bed. This girl had thick, wild hair that went down to her waist, and she was standing there, arms hanging out to the side, like she was ready to pounce. I quickly turned the light on, but couldn't see anyone, or anything that would have cast such a distinct shadow. The next morning, I woke up to my sister freaking out because all of her horse pictures had been torn off the walls. In addition to that, several years after this particular incident, the people who previously owned our house dropped by to talk to my mom. They asked her if anyone had seen the little girl who haunted the house. Another time, I had this really vivid nightmare about zombies. I was surrounded and they started pulling at me, only I woke up and I could still see them. They were in my room, crawling over my bed, grabbing at me. I turned on my light and blinked frantically until they disappeared. I breathed a sigh of relief, then looked up. Not 4 feet away, a black mass was hovering. It shot into my closet when I looked directly at it. A few years after that, I was home alone on a very dark winter night. I was sitting on the couch reading a book. My sister's cat, Stormy, was laying on top of the recliner, drifting off to sleep. Then, I saw a grayish figure walk through the living room and into my parents' room. I might have thought I imagined it, except Stormy had watched it too, and her eyes were glued to the spot where it disappeared. When I was 16 or 17, my parents decided to remodel their bedroom. When they started breaking down the wall in their closet, they found a Bible. We think it was written in German, and the weird thing was it looked signed around the edges. We knew there had been a fire in the home many years ago. My parents wanted to keep the Bible out, but I insisted they replace it. They listened, but I think the damage was done. My sister and I didn't get much sleep until they finished the remodel. We kept waking up scared, and both of us were having nightmares. Sometimes we would hear noises during the night, like whispering or footsteps. Then we started waking up with injuries we couldn't account for. Finger-shaped bruises appeared on our wrists. I had a long burn running down my face, and my sister had 3 deep scratches on her chest. Once the construction stopped, things calmed down for the most part, but we would still hear footsteps when we were alone in the house, and I often heard my name being called. I have since moved out of the house. My sister still lives there, but refuses to talk about the things we experienced. This was a true scary ghost story by The Farm. Haunted Farm. When I was in my teenage years, my parents moved to a new home just outside of the border between England and Wales. It seemed like it had been unoccupied for a number of years when I first saw it. We moved from our old house because it was too small. This new house, however, was massive. The woods were next to this house, and there was a huge, large shed outside. This house was in the middle of nowhere, no neighbors. However, there was a small town. During the first night, I woke up about 5 times, if not more. I was overwhelmed by this feeling of dread, death almost. I heard strange things, heavy footsteps, and silent moaning sounds. The next morning, my mother was horrified to see that the pictures on the wall that she hung up on the first day had been turned upside down. I asked her if she heard anything the night before, but she didn't. During the second day, we finished unpacking our belongings, and some things started to go missing. This house had a basement, and we'd always find the missing belongings down there for some reason. On the third day in the house, activity started escalating. We heard loud moaning sounds and heavy footsteps coming from the basement. We saw things from the corner of our eyes. Black smog flying past like the speed of light. Different times we would see different shapes of this strong, but different shapes every time. During that night, nothing happened, and I finally got a good night's sleep. On the 4th day, We went to the town to gather information on our new home in the local library. We asked the librarian if she had any books on our home. She looked at us dazed and asked, "You live in Wither Farm?" We replied with a yes, and she told us that we wouldn't find anything on it in the library, but in fact, she had information herself for us. She told us that there was a farmer that lived there during the 19th century. He was married and had a son. They were a normal family until his son died in an accident. When she told us that the farmer's son died after bleeding to death when he was caught in his father's bear trap. 2 years later, after finally putting up with this ghost, we moved out. The moans and footsteps were louder than ever. Was this the ghost of a farmer that lost his son and can't rest because it was his fault? It seems to me that he still can't forgive himself. We always heard moaning noises. So what do you think? The haunted farmhouse that I couldn't escape. In 1982, I was doing some carpentry work for a farmer in Elk Point, South Dakota, on a house that had been moved from town to his farm about 6 miles from town. Almost as soon as I started on it, I noticed things occurring that I could not explain. I would be working in a room and go to get some materials, and the lights would be off when I returned, and lights would be on in rooms where I had not been. I worked for several days and these things kept going on. On the 4th day, I was working in the kitchen, putting up paneling, and I had a ladder sitting in the middle of the room with a box of panel nails sitting on the paint shelf of the ladder. Suddenly, the ladder started sliding across the floor and it tipped over, spilling the nails all over the floor. I could smell jasmine perfume really strongly. The room had gotten very cold and it was 90 degrees outside. I had not felt the house shaking, nor were there any trucks going by. I picked up the ladder and got down on my hands and knees to pick up the rails, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow moving from the bathroom into the bedroom. Then I heard the stairs squeak, and I got up and went to the stairs to the upstairs bedrooms. I could not see anyone, so I went up the stairs and looked through the bedrooms, but I could find no one up there. I went back downstairs and finished up picking the nails. A few minutes later, the farmer came in to see how I was doing. I told him about the strange things that had been going on, and he started laughing. He said, "Wow, you just met our ghost." And then he told me a story about the house and why it was moved. He said the house was originally in town, and the old woman that lived in the house had killed herself by hanging in the basement. He took me to the basement and showed me the barn that she hung herself from, and where the neighbors found her. No one had been able to live in the house since she had died, as they could not handle the pranks she would pull on them. We went back upstairs, and he told me that she had never been violent, just that she liked to turn lights on and off and move things around. He told me to talk to her and she would leave me alone. Then he would tell me that when they moved out the house, they thought the ghost would stay in town, but she did not, and now he was stuck with her. As he left, he said that he would not harm me, but she would continue moving things around and turning the lights off and on. I continued to work on the house, and a few days later, I finished the kitchen. I saw her shadow in the bedroom looking towards me, and I said, "I hope you enjoy your new kitchen." I was there for almost a week after that, and I did not have any more problems with the lights or anything else. When the job was done and I had moved on to other work, I talked to the farmer several times, and he told me that the old lady was not bothering the people that were currently living in the house. He had no explanation as to why. Believe me, this scared the heck out of me, and I hoped I would never have this type of experience again.